She said, we're staying at this dorm, and if you want to come tonight, we're going to all be there and you can come and we'll pray for you. I think me, like 10 minutes before that, would have said, absolutely no way. Just something broke in me in that moment where there was a crack of like receptiveness. And so I said, okay. In a world obsessed with convenience and quick fixes, I'm approaching wellness differently. After healing from chronic illness by overhauling my entire life, I'm now on a mission to help women like me to thrive and not just survive. I'm Kristen, and you're listening to the OrganiMama Podcast. Before we start our conversation today, I want to let you know that the OrganiMama's Guide to Mold is officially available, and it might just change your life. If you've ever wanted to hear directly from me about how to test your home for mold, how to hire the right mold professionals, how to prevent mold in your home, how to detox your body from mold, and how to go about house hunting when you want a mold-free place to live, this mini video course was made just for you. I've intentionally priced this guide to make it affordable for everyone because I firmly believe that cost shouldn't be the reason that you aren't able to be armed with mold knowledge. Check out today's show notes for the link and get started on the OrganiMama's Guide to Mold today. Welcome back to the OrganiMama Podcast. Today is going to be a interesting episode because I am going to share about my experience with depression. It's interesting. I really have only publicly shared about this one time, and it was 10 years ago. I'm about to give away my exact age right now, but 10 years ago, I shared about my story of depression in front of my whole high school, which was extremely scary for me. But it was a powerful testimony of what I was going through at the time. And I'm really glad I did that. But it's also been a really, really long time since I have shared this whole story. It's very hard and personal to me. So apologies in advance if I struggle to get through telling some of this, just because going through the 10-year anniversary of my high school graduation this year in 2025 has been a pretty sobering reminder to me of what I went through and what I was saved from. So I will get started by saying that I grew up depleted. And looking back, I know this just from the way that I felt majority of the time, the kinds of foods I was eating overall, and just symptoms I had throughout my childhood and like adolescence. Just looking back, knowing so much more about nutritional depletion, I think it just puts the pieces together a lot better for me. But so going all the way back to about 2009, I was in 7th grade at the time, and my family had just spent a year living in Thailand. And we moved back to the States. We only went over to Thailand as missionaries for 1 year, and then we came back to the States. And we weren't sure if we were going to end up back overseas or if we were going to stay in Indiana, which is where we were from. And, 7th grade is not a good time really for anyone. In fact, I don't know if I've ever met anyone who was like, oh, 7th grade was my best year of life. And the same was true for me. I was going through a lot of transition. We had just lived overseas for a year, and then we were moving back to Indiana. So I was trying to reconnect with old friends. We were homeschooled when we lived in the States. I had gone to private school in Thailand when we had lived there the previous year. And I had actually really loved my school experience. I'm highly competitive and I'm very social. And so I really loved the competitive and social aspects of school. And so going back to Indiana and having to go back to homeschooling was really a challenge for me. And so in 7th grade, we got plugged back into the same homeschool co-op that I had been in prior to living in Thailand. And unfortunately, there were just some relationships of friends I had, or acquaintances, or I don't know, ex-friends maybe. One person in particular, one boy in particular, who really was just not nice to me that year. And so I really begged my mom over and over. First of all, I begged my parents to let me go to private school, which they declined. And then I also begged my parents to take me out of the co-op we were in because I was just having such a negative experience being around this boy who I had previously had a crush on, but he was not very nice to me that year. And he made fun of me a lot. And I mean, you can't blame seventh graders for being jerks. They're all going through a terrible time in life. So all that being said, my seventh grade year, I was going through a lot of transition. I was struggling. I was playing sports. I was definitely not eating like nutrient dense foods for, a 13-year-old girl of what you need at that time. Also going through puberty. I had gotten my period for the first time in sixth grade. So I was just a few months into establishing a menstrual cycle. So there's just a lot of hormone changes and a lot of things going on at that time. And then around that same time, I also grew a really deep set of friendships with people, some other seventh and then moving into eighth graders through my church. And I had this kind of core group of friends that we were super, super close, and they became really, really important to me. And we made a band together, which was really a fun experience. It was called 14G. It stood for One for God. Doesn't get cheesier than that, but we were a church worship band, and we would lead worship at youth group. And so that was actually some of my best memories of those years, was just hanging with that group of friends and spending a lot of time together. And they were all really wonderful people who loved the Lord. But we were all, seventh and eighth graders, and that's a tumultuous time. So during my eighth grade year, my parents agreed to let me pull out of that co-op. And so I was fully doing homeschool at home. And this is when I believe my depression actually started, was during eighth grade, because it was near the beginning of my eighth grade year that my parents announced to my brothers and I that we were going to move back to Thailand the following year. So when I was going to go into ninth grade, high school, we were going to be moving back to Thailand. And this time it was going to be a permanent move. And I think because I had finally found a group of friends that I just jived with so much and really enjoyed spending time with, I felt really heartbroken about the idea of moving. I kind of thought I had my whole future planned out in terms of like where I would go to college in a few years and maybe even who I would marry and all of these things. Like I just thought I knew when I was 14. Obviously, what 14-year-old knows any of that? Nobody. But I thought I knew what was going to happen to me. And it just didn't pan out that way as I was starting to look ahead. And I was like thinking that I would, go to Thailand with my parents and then try to come back to the US for senior year to like be with my friends. And I had all these elaborate plans and just none of that panned out. But I just began to really resent my parents for making this decision. And obviously looking back now as an adult, I can understand how they were following the call of the Lord and that there was beauty and goodness in it, even when it was a very difficult decision on me and my current season. But between me just struggling with homeschooling that year and going through puberty and dealing with all of these hormones and probably dealing with some severe nutritional imbalances, and actually, looking back, we know that the house I was living in that year had mold in it. I think that's how my depression started. And so I do believe that it was a combination of chemical imbalances and physical, depletion, along with a spiritual component. Whether that was, both just a lack of leaning into the Holy Spirit. I did have a relationship with Jesus at the time. I would say that I have had a deep relationship with Jesus Christ since an early age, probably around age 7. And I knew the Bible pretty much cover to cover by then because I was raised in a Christian family, but there hadn't really been a lot of opportunity for my faith to become my own yet. So, eighth grade comes and goes. It's a good year and also a really hard year at the same time. I felt like I was kind of living a double life where when I would be with my friends, when I would be at youth group, I was just bubbly and cheerful and flirtatious and just happy-go-lucky. I pretended that I had an addiction to hand sanitizer that year, which I don't really know what the implications of that are, but like I loved just being a goober. And so I just kind of came up with this like story of how I was like addicted to sniffing hand sanitizer. And so every time I would see it, I would just pretend to go nuts and then just like make a really big dramatic deal out of sniffing it and then being like, oh, I feel so much better. And like that was a weird season that I went through. I liked being the center of attention. And so I did a lot of things that kind of would put me in the spotlight, whether that was our band or just like being dramatic in public situations and things like that. But I just had a very like outgoing, charismatic personality. And so I leaned heavily into that in public scenarios. But then at home, I treated my family terrible. I was super mean, especially to my younger brother. And I was really, really disrespectful to my parents. And when I was at home, I just felt like I was in a dark cloud of just, like unable to pull myself out of frustration and anger and being super, aggressive towards my mom in particular and my younger brother. Like when they would say things I didn't like, I would just snap at them and I had no self-control. And so I felt like I was really living a double life. And the time came for us to move back to Thailand at the start of 9th grade, which was a really, really hard season for me and really heartbreaking for me to leave my friends behind. And that kind of started my 4 years living in Thailand for high school. Now, there's a lot that I could say about these 4 years. There was a lot that happened to me. There was a lot that I went through. There were a lot of good and bad experiences over the course of my time in high school. But one thing that kind of stayed consistent was me going through in and out of seasons of depression. These similar feelings to what I felt in 8th grade kind of continued. And I wouldn't say it was constant through high school. There were definitely ebbs and flows. But when it really came to a head was the fall of my senior year. So we had been in Thailand now for over 3 years, and I was beginning my last year of high school. In high school, I had a variety of different friendships that were consistent through all 4 years. But then I also had some friendships where there were some falling outs and there were some complications. I also had a couple of different, romantic relationships that were pretty hard. One in particular that was pretty damaging to me on an emotional level. And then, I had other kind of friendships, relationships that were pretty healthy and pretty, fine for being in high school. But through all of this, I really was trying to pursue a relationship with Jesus and trying to deepen my faith and grow in my faith, but also dealing with a lot of pressures that missionary kids face of wanting to keep up a face of having it all together, even if you don't, because missionary families usually are living on support, which means that many families from your home country, so for us, it was the U.S., excuse me, many families from your home country are financially supporting your family in what you're doing. So there does feel like there's this pressure to have it all together because you have to send these reports back to these families who are funding your family's mission work, and you want it to sound like, we're doing great. Thanks for your support. Thanks for sponsoring us. The Lord is at work. We're thriving. And then just so rarely is that like the whole picture. Missionary families have an incredibly high rate of depression and even suicide because there's just so many pressures that you are facing when you're living overseas, or even if you're, a domestic missionary, there's just so much pressure that you're facing in that situation of feeling like spiritually and emotionally you have to have it all together when we're just human, dealing with human experiences, loss, joy, grief, physical illness, and then add, the pressures of living in another country on top of all of that. When you're in high school, going through all of the high school things and all the changes and the relationships and the drama and the grades and sports and all of the extracurriculars, there's just so many factors at play. And that was definitely the case for me. I was very involved in things in high school. I did theater, I did sports, I did worship band. I, was a 4.0 student and I studied really hard, and I had my toe dipped in many, many different pools of interest. And at the same time, I was dealing with this deep sense of being unfulfilled. And I think coming from this deep theological background, I understood like feeling like your life isn't fulfilled really is an indication that like you need the Lord to fill that. And so I think the word depression was very taboo, and I didn't label what I was going through depression until my senior year because I didn't want to put that term on myself because it felt like, well, Christians aren't allowed to be depressed because, if you're in a relation, if you're walking with the Lord and you have the Holy Spirit inside of you, then you shouldn't deal with that, because that's probably just a sin issue. And that's just kind of what I thought. And, if you know anything about my health story, you know that I didn't really know much about human health or even holistic health until I was in my early 20s. And so at age 17, I knew zilch about nourishing my body or sleeping well or nervous system regulation. Like, those would have been completely foreign terms to me at that time. And so the start of my senior year happened, and I honestly feel like some of my depression was stemming from experiences from my soccer team. I was struggling a lot with some of the relationships on my soccer team and feeling like really jilted by some of my friends, feeling left out, feeling really unseen or ignored even. And when you're 17 and you just want to be seen and you want to be noticed and you want to be cared for and you want people to listen to you and value you, and you feel like that's not happening even from people that you really care about, that cuts really deep. And so there came a time when I think we were going through a soccer tournament. This was around my birthday in the fall, and a bunch of my friends were going to go and hang out together. And I didn't want to go. I didn't want to leave the house. I think we had finished our games for the weekend, and I just was in my room and really bummed out about some social things that were happening. And it wasn't just disappointment. It was I couldn't pull myself out of this slump. And my mom asked me if she could tell. And so she came up to my room and she said, "Hey, do you want to go get a pet bird?" And this might sound kind of random, but I had told her for a good amount of time that I would be really interested in having a pet bird. I actually have some pretty severe dog and cat allergies. And so I had always been interested in finding a pet that I could really enjoy and bond with that wouldn't make me feel unwell. And so we had discussed it for some time about the potential of me getting a pet bird, but she really just wanted to bring a little bright spot to my life. So we went together to this Thai pet market, and we found this little cockatiel that was white and gray, and picked it out and got a cage and got food and took it home. And I swear that little cockatiel was a gift from the Lord, because that bird saved my life in some ways. As the months progressed during my senior year, things got worse and worse and worse for me, to the point where, again, I felt like I was living a double life, kind of similar to my experience in 8th grade, but this was, magnified significantly, where I would get up and go to school in the morning. I would be cheerful, bubbly, my normal fun self at school, and then I would go to soccer practice, and then I would come home, and then I would go into my room, and I would not want to come out. And I would, complete my homework. Maybe I would procrastinate on it and just kind of barely get by. I would be watching a lot of dark movies and TV shows in my room by myself. I was not eating very much. And it was around this time that I started thinking about what it might be like to harm myself. And sorry. There's just so many things that I wish I could go back and say to that 18-year-old at the time, just to tell her of you are seen and you are known and you are loved, because I just didn't feel it. And it felt like I was waking up every single morning and going to bed every single night just in a black cloud. And that visual of being in a black cloud is kind of how I came to picture my life, where I was I could only see things that were about an inch away and not super clearly. And so I could kind of fake it when I had class to attend or practice to go to. But anything beyond that, I didn't have the capacity or the energy to even try. And truthfully, I didn't want to get better. I can't really explain why. And I think looking back, I know just how depleted I was in terms of not nourishing myself with food, not sleeping well enough. I spent a ton of time looking at blue light. And then spiritually, I really was not nourishing my soul either. I was not meditating on scripture. I was not praying. I was just nothinging. I just was trying to make it each day. And as time went on, my thoughts of wanting to experiment with self-harm and even thinking about like the world would be better off without me got more and more vivid and real. And I really don't think, aside from maybe one or two close friends who knew a little bit about what was going on, including my boyfriend at the time, I don't think really anybody around me knew that I was going through this because I was really good at pretending. And so we got through the holidays, and I did a few times, I did self-harm in my house. And it wasn't ever anything severe enough that somebody would have seen it or asked me about it, or even I was terrified that my parents would ask me or see. And so I picked areas of my body that would never be exposed, because I just couldn't possibly bear like letting my parents down or like letting anyone see through, the wall that I put up. And, on the outside, I think people thought I really had it all together in some ways because, I was a chapel band leader. I was literally leading chapel. And then I would go home and just be like a complete shell of a person. And so we get to March of my senior year. And honestly, this was the lowest point. I had to drop out of a class because I couldn't keep up. My brain was literally just not even functioning enough. It was AP stats, and I just couldn't even, I just didn't even have the capacity to think about those kinds of concepts, statistics. And so I had to drop out of the class, and we had to explain to the administration why I needed to drop out without getting a fail, just to take an incomplete instead, because I didn't want to ruin my college, application. But honestly, at that point, I wasn't even sure if I was going to make it to college. I'd already been accepted to the school that I thought I wanted to go to, which is where I ended up dating Nick, my husband, in the future. So spoiler alert, I did end up going there. But I'd already been accepted, so I knew I already had, a college that I liked that I could go to. But at this point, I thought so frequently about not living anymore that I wasn't even sure I was going to make it to the end of my senior year. And one of the things that got me out of bed every single morning was this little cockatiel that I had. And it was actually, we found out at one point that it was a female, but we thought it was a male when we bought it. So when we bought the bird, I named it Leo. And then found out a few months later that this was actually a female cockatiel, not a male cockatiel. So then I was like, well, we'll just call her Leo, but it will be short for Leona, I think. It's been a while now. Leonora or Leona. So anyways, Leo, the female cockatiel that I thought was a boy for several months. This little cockatiel would get me out of bed every morning. And what was really crazy is these birds are so smart, and they tend to kind of bond with a person. If they're pets, they tend to bond with a person. And so this bird definitely had bonded to me. And her cage was downstairs in our house near the front door. And there were 4 bedrooms upstairs in our house. And somehow this cockatiel was so smart that she knew the sound of my bedroom door opening compared to all the others. Now, I could not tell the difference between the bedroom doors opening. They all sounded the same to me, and they were all about equidistant from the stairs. I could not tell the difference between the doors opening, but somehow Leo knew the difference between my door opening and all 3 other doors. And so every morning when my door would open, Leo would start chirping like crazy, just anticipating that I was coming down the stairs. And just having this little pet that was so excited to see me when I would come downstairs every morning, I swear kept me from doing something more serious with self-harm or acting on my suicidal ideation. Because I thought to myself, what will happen to Leo if I'm not around? She's not going to have anyone that loves her the way I love her. Sorry, this is kind of heavy. So that was kind of what got me out of bed for a few months. In the winter and spring of my senior year of high school was just Leo and the excitement of Leo. And we also had 2 different motorbikes. Our family owned 2 different motorbikes that were the same model. They were just different colors and they sounded the same. The engines, the motors sounded the same on these motorbikes. And Leo, her cage was by the front door. She knew the sound of my motorbike coming down the street and pulling into the driveway compared to my dad's motorbike. And she would chirp and scream like with excitement when I would turn onto our street and start driving down. Like from like 100 feet away, she would know that I was coming to the house. And like, how wild is that? That's just crazy when I think back on that. So March of my senior year, a missions team came to our school, which is a pretty common thing. We were having like a spiritual emphasis week. A missions team came to our school from California to kind of run this spiritual emphasis week. So they had like chapel sessions every night in addition to our like once weekly chapel sessions. And so it was optional to attend, but it was like highly encouraged. And so, I had met a couple people from this team a year prior because my dad had worked with them or met with them when they came to scope out their future trip. So like a couple people from this team from California came my junior year and they met with my dad and a couple other people from the school to talk about what a spiritual emphasis week could look like. And then they planned the trip and then they came back a year later. So we get to a year later. This is March of my senior year. I know a couple of them because I've met them like for lunch once a year prior. And so they're familiar with who I am. They know who my dad is. And so it's this team of probably about 10 different people, maybe mostly women. I think it was maybe between 7 and 10 women and a couple of guys. So they are having this evening session and I was like, I'm not going. I'm going to be at home in my bed. I'm not going. And one of my friends, was like, can you just please, can you come? I can't remember if it was one of my good girlfriends or if it was my boyfriend who said, could you please come because, this is a prayer event and would really like you to come. I can't remember who asked me to come, but I begrudgingly agreed. And I knew that in this event, they were going to be, people could come up and ask for prayer if they needed to be prayed over. So we sat, whoever I was there with, I can't remember. We sat near the back of the room and there's, a teaching session and a worship session. And I just kind of remember like bumbling through it kind of like in my fog. And then near the end, there was like kind of an altar call where they said like, if you need prayer, come, we have people stationed around the room and come find someone that's stationed around the room and we'll pray for you. And I was just sitting there and I was like, I'm not going out for prayer. I do not want anyone to pray for me. I do not want to be well. Whoever I was sitting with was like, hey, you should go. And I was like, no, I really don't want to. And they were like, no, you really should. Like, please just go ask them to pray for you. That'll be it. That'll be all there is. And I was like, okay, fine. So I walked up to the woman who was leading the team, who was kind of off to the side, and I had met her the year prior. So she knew my name and she knew what I looked like and she knew who my dad was, but she didn't know any details about my life at all.
Quick sidebar before we get back to today's topic. I've tried a lot of non-toxic laundry detergents and they either don't really clean my clothes or they're just way too expensive. In 2024, I finally decided to try Truly Free's liquid laundry detergent and I was honestly just blown away by A, how effective it was at cleaning my nasty clothes and B, how stinking affordable it was, like even cheaper per load than Tide. If you want to try my absolute favorite non-toxic laundry detergent from Truly Free, you can find the link in today's show notes. All right, back to the episode.
So I walk up to her. There's, like some quiet worship music playing in the background. There's students going all around the room, like praying for each other or like going up to be prayed for. So I felt like I was being kind of, not super obvious. Like I was like, I don't think people aren't looking at me, I just kind of went off to talk to her on the side. And I walked up to her and she made eye contact with me before I even got to her. And I didn't even say anything. I just walked up to her and I started to cry. And I didn't know what was happening to me. I felt super embarrassed because I had just kept all of the things I was going through so under wraps. And she took one look at me and then she said, Kristen, I don't know why, but earlier today, the Lord told me that our team needed to lay hands on you and pray for you. And I just could not even fathom how that was true, but I knew it was true. And I just was crying there and I said, okay. And she said, I want you to come to the dorm that we're staying at if you're comfortable. We're all staying at this dorm, and it was actually close to my house. She said, we're staying at this dorm, and if you want to come tonight, we're going to all be there, and you can come, and we'll pray for you. And I think me, like 10 minutes before that, would have said, absolutely no way. But just something broke in me in that moment where there was a crack of like receptiveness. And so I said, okay. And so I kind of like putzed around a little bit after the service by myself. And then I rode my motorbike, I guess, to the dorm when I knew they had like had enough time to pack up from their event and head back. And so when I got there, they were all waiting for me. And I was kind of surprised at myself that I even showed up because this felt like a very scary thing to do. And so I got to the dorm where they were staying and I went up the stairs to the floor they were staying at, knocked on the door, and I opened the door and there was this group of women, probably about 7 women that were in this room, and they were just all waiting for me, and they smiled at me and they hugged me when I came in, and I just felt this sense of like I was actually seen. And I think that that's what for so much of my high school experience, I felt like people were seeing me, but they weren't really seeing me. And I think I just needed someone to look at me and say like, we care about you. And so I walked into the room and they asked me to sit down on the floor. They had like pulled a pillow out to the middle. And they said like, we're going to start praying for you now. And so they put their hands on my shoulders and my arms. And they said, they just started to pray. And I still hadn't even really told them like details. Like I hadn't said like, oh, I'm depressed, I'm self-harming, I'm dealing with suicidal ideation. I didn't really say any of that. They just knew I needed prayer. And so I just sat there. And now I also want to preface by saying like I was raised in a non-denominational church with a Baptist background. So more charismatic faith was not what I had been raised with, and it wasn't really something that I was even really comfortable with at the time and had no real experience with. And to this day, I would say that night was really the only time that the Lord has given me like a clear vision. And there is no experience I have ever been through in my life that can really compare to this evening that I'm about to tell you what happened. So as I was sitting there and they were praying for me, and some of them they were taking turns, and then sometimes multiple women were praying at the same time. I was just sitting there with my eyes closed, just trying to receive it all and just trying to like be open. They asked me a few minutes in, they said, do you see anything? And I said, I see fog. I'm in fog. I just feel like I'm in a black cloud. And they began to pray over this fog, and they began to pray over this cloud that I was in. And really slowly, as they were praying for me, I received a vision, and it was actually the craziest experience. And even to this day, when I tell it back, it's still hard for me to believe that this happened, especially with my like very conservative Christian background of not really like being exposed to much like charismatic practices of Christian faith. And so what happened was they were praying over me, and I think that I was hearing them, but it just kind of all tuned out. And all of a sudden I found myself standing, sorry, this is so emotional for me. I found myself standing at the edge of a train track. And right in front of me, my black cloud had turned into a train. And it was black and it was huge and it was barreling just inches in front of my face as fast as you could imagine a train going right in front of your body. And I was standing there on the tracks and the train was loud and it was terrifying and it had dissolved, like it had formed from this black cloud that I saw myself in. And I was standing there, literally my toes were just inches from the tracks. And this train is rushing by, rushing by, rushing by. It's loud. It's overwhelming. I feel terrified. And then all of a sudden, I knew that Jesus was standing on the other side of the tracks. I could sense him there. And he said, "Take a step forward." And I said, I can't take a step forward. I'm going to die. And he said, "I need you to trust me. Will you take a step forward?" And I stood there for a long time and I couldn't move because I was so terrified of dying, of being absolutely obliterated by this train in front of me. And I could just feel that he was there on the other side and he was looking right through that train and he could see me and he was saying, "Trust me, just take one step." And I did. And I took one step fully expecting that I was going to die. I took one step forward and as I did, the train dissipated into it turned into fog and it just fizzled away. It was gone when I took one step out onto the tracks. And then I saw him and he was standing there just a few feet away from me on the other side of the tracks and he was looking at me. And then I looked to my left down the tracks and I looked down. I could see mountains in the background and a huge field kind of just all surrounding. And I looked to my left. And when I looked down the track, I could actually see that the train was starting to reform from the cloud in the distance, like way down in the distance. And I began to feel afraid of I've got one foot on the track right now and I'm looking down and I can see that this train is starting to reform from this black fog that's down there. And then Jesus said to me, he said, "No, look at me." And I looked back at him and I lost sight of what I had been seeing on my left. And I looked at him and then he walked the rest of the way to me to meet me where I was at with just one foot out. I didn't even fully step all the way out, just one foot. He came and met me in the middle. And I just knew that I was healed. And so when I opened my eyes and I snapped out of the vision, I started crying and the women were still praying. And I opened my eyes and I looked one of them in the eyes and she said, "Your eyes." I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Your eyes changed color." I was like, "What are you talking about?" And she said, "When you came in here, your eyes were gray and now they're bright blue." The sun had been set for multiple hours, so there was no like change of lighting in the room. And I was like, "Are you serious?" And she said, "Yeah, your eyes were like hazy and gray when you came in this room and now they are bright blue." And so I kind of recounted to the ladies of what had just happened to me. And then they hugged me and they cried with me. And then I went home and I just didn't even know, I couldn't find words for what I had just experienced. And so I just went to bed. I think I came in and I didn't really tell my parents where I had gone. They were just like, "Oh, hey, how was it tonight?" And I was like, "Good." And then I went to bed. And then the next morning I woke up and I was completely changed. And I was excited to wake up and I was excited to go to school. And seeing Leo wasn't the only thing that got me out of bed. And I could just think about, like, all I could think was like, Jesus saved me last night. Like, from darkness. And I went to school and I went to soccer, this was actually in the spring. So I was at musical theater rehearsal. I went to rehearsal and then I came home, and that night I told my parents what had happened, and they just were beside themselves, just first of all relieved, but also just shocked and amazed, because at this point I had seen a counselor. I had been told that I had depression. I had been prescribed Zoloft, which I had taken a little bit. But I had been so resistant to any of that. My parents just didn't even know what to do to help me. And I don't think they even really fully understood the extent of the darkness I was living in on a daily basis. But from that point on, like, I was changed. I was completely changed. And my whole outlook on life was just like grateful. Now, that's not to say that I wasn't messed up and a sinner, because I absolutely was. And I made mistakes and I didn't do everything perfectly my last few months of my senior year. And then I went to college, and we all make questionable decisions when we're in college, but I wasn't even sure I was going to make it to graduation. I wasn't even sure I was going to be able to finish my classes. And then I was able to graduate with a 4.0 and go on to go to college. And I shared this testimony in front of my whole school the week of graduation, which, 4 months prior, if you would have asked me that, like told me that was going to happen, I would have thought you were absolutely joshing me, because I was thinking, I don't even know if I'll make it that far. And so I think, as somebody who now thinks so much about health and the relationship between our health and our mental health and our nervous system and all of these things, do I look back and think that my depression was probably a result of years of depletion and, under eating, under nourishment, and mineral and nutrient deficiencies? Yes. And also probably mold exposure? Yes. I think those were huge root cause factors. But at the end of the day, God decides who lives and dies. God decides who is healed and who is not. And just because you are or aren't healed doesn't mean that you are more or less worthy. But I think that this was a really humbling experience for me to recognize that, like, even without doing all the right health things, even after that healing, that night where I was healed, still wasn't eating well. I still wasn't sleeping well. I was still using blue light. I was still doing all the wrong things. In fact, for the next 5 or 6 years, that was the case. But God still chose to heal me in that moment, in that night. And what's even crazier is I loosely followed some of the people on that team after that experience, and some of them walked away from their faith. And, I don't want to get into a theological argument of once saved, always saved, because I don't honestly know what I think about that, but that's not the point of this episode. But there were women in that room who were praying over me who are now not walking with Jesus, and they're involved in satanic practices. So God can use anybody. God can use anybody. God can heal anybody for his purposes. And I think if there's anything that I take away from that, first of all, just I owe my life to the Lord. Absolutely I do, because I would not be where I am today if that night hadn't happened. I believe that strongly. Would I have actually taken my life? I don't know. I'm not sure. I thought about it a lot, for certainly. Would I have actually acted on it? I don't know. But I owe my life to Jesus 1,000%. And I think that we forget so often that our healing, it does have to do with the health decisions that we make, but it also doesn't, because Jesus Christ is the great physician. And if he wants to heal you, he can heal you in 2 minutes. He can heal you in 2 seconds. There is no illness, mental illness or physical illness or chronic illness or cancer that is too big for Jesus. And if he wants to heal you, if he decides to heal you, he's going to heal you, whether or not you're doing the right things. And so I never, ever, ever want to remove prayer and the Holy Spirit from my tool belt of wellness hacks. Jesus is the ultimate wellness hack. And I think that we forget that. And if you're listening to this and you're kind of scratching your head, like, I don't really understand this Jesus stuff. And I just thought Christians are kind of like quacks. And this is all just a bunch of like religious mumbo jumbo. Like, I understand that. I understand that it can be confusing. It can be a whole lot of like spiritual lingo, and like Christianese is what we call it sometimes, when Christian people start using like all these Christian terms, and it just doesn't feel applicable to everyone. But just in the plainest of terms, Jesus gave me life. He did. I would not have my platform now if it were not for Jesus. I would probably not be where I'm at today. I would have not married my husband. I would not have my children. And I owe him every single day, and I owe him every single breath, and every beat of my heart is because of Jesus Christ. And there are a lot of bad things that happen in this life that we cannot explain, but God's plan is so much bigger and so much better than what we think we want for ourselves. I do not wish life-threatening depression on anyone. But if I had not gone through that experience, I would not know how to trust God in the way that I do now. And I would not see the healing power that he has if I had not been through that experience myself. And so truly, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, wow, this is really crazy, and I just kind of want to know more about this Jesus stuff, find a Bible, read the book of John, and just let it sit with you. Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life, and there is no way to the Father, and there is no way to find true healing, and there is no way to find true satisfaction or true peace without accepting Jesus Christ as your Savior. We are all broken. We are all sinful. We are all in need of saving. And if you feel like there is just something missing, like I felt for so many years of my life, if you feel like there is just something that you're always grasping for, that you're always reaching for, that is missing, it is Jesus. And if we've gotten this far and you still haven't really quite picked up the fact that Jesus is the only reason that I am alive, I just want you to know that all of it is a wash. All the non-toxic living, all the holistic health, all of the things we do to better ourselves and to better our families and to better our country and our world and our communities and have good, fulfilling lives. It is all a complete wash if you do not have Jesus. And so I'm just going to pray right now. I didn't really plan this out, but I'm just going to pray right now for any of you listening who your ears are sparked. So Jesus, I thank you first and foremost that you gave me life. I thank you for that night back in March of 2015 when you came and you picked me out of the deepest, darkest pit and you gave me life. And you took my fears and you took my shame and you took my dark cloud of depression and you turned it into a train that I could look at and I could visualize and I could recognize that I just needed to look at you and I was saved. And I thank you for that night, and I thank you for your goodness and your miracles. And right now I pray for every single person who is listening to this podcast episode, whether it just got released or whether it's been months or years since this episode has aired. Lord, if there is someone listening right now who is stuck in the pit of depression, Lord, would you lift them out? Would you save them? Would you heal them? Would you protect them from the desire to take their life or to harm themselves, Lord? Would you let them see that you love them and you desire a relationship with them and that you are offering them the free gift of salvation from their sin, from eternity in hell, Lord? Would you help them to see that life is worth living because it is worth living for you? Life is not worth living for me. Life is not worth living for us. It's not worth living for money. It's not worth living for good health. It is worth living for Jesus and Jesus alone. Would you make that evident? And if there's anyone listening right now who does not know you as their Lord and Savior, God, would you pull them to yourself? Would you help them to see their brokenness and their need for a Savior? And would you illuminate your truth of salvation through the Bible? that they would find that there is nothing on earth they can turn to that can save them from themselves other than you. There is no way to eternal life other than through you, Jesus. I pray all these things in the holy and perfect name of Jesus Christ. Amen. That feels like a heavy place to end, but I also think that this is a really, really important part of my story that I can't leave out. Because yes, I have been through healing of chronic illness from lifestyle change. And yes, I've been through mold. And yes, I've been through multiple pregnancies and births. But I wouldn't be here if 18-year-old Kristen hadn't been saved by Jesus from depression. There's always more to that story. That was the abridged version, of course. But I really hope and pray that this might have spoken to at least one person, because as I always think, if anything I share just helps one person, it's worth it for me to have spent time on it. So if that's you, then I'm so grateful that you took the time to listen to this episode today, because this is a really deep and pretty personal part of my story. And yeah, if this touched you in some way, or if you have further questions about anything I talked about here, feel free to send me a message on Instagram. I do my best to respond to them. You can also message my podcast account at the OrganiMama Podcast. Podcast-related questions are always welcome there. So yeah, thank you for tuning in. Appreciate you guys, and we'll catch you on the next episode of the OrganiMama Podcast.